My name is Sharif Girgis, and I'm the author of a book called What is Marriage, Man and Woman, A Defense. In that book, my co-authors and I take a look at the arguments for and against redefining civil marriage to include same-sex relationships. And one of the questions that's often posed to people who hold the traditional view of marriage is, what difference does it make? Who cares which relationships get recognized as a marriage? If some people want their relationship recognized, why don't we give them all the benefits and status of marriage? How could it hurt you or your marriage? But I think this idea just ignores a really crucial fact, which is the effect of law on culture, and the effect of culture on people's choices and behavior and lives. Redefining marriage would not just change who gets eligible for a certain set of legal benefits. It would change the vision of marriage that the state teaches everyone in society. And over time, that new vision would take hold. And over time, the more it takes hold, the more it informs public opinion, the more it would inform social practice. And let's take a closer look at what that vision of marriage would shape. It would be the idea that marriage is mainly about adult emotional union and satisfaction and fulfillment. And the more people understood that idea and absorbed it and acted accordingly, the harder it would be for them to live by the stabilizing norms that make marriage different and that make it relevant to the common good. I mean, think about it. It's pretty striking that the state is involved in marriage at all. Usually the more personal a relationship is, the less the state's involved. So it regulates business relationships much more than it does best friendships. Marriage is an exception. Why is that? The reason is that every society has needed what only marriage could provide, which are the stabilizing norms that make sure that wherever possible, children are reared by their own mother and father, by the mother and father whose union gave them life in a committed relationship. And if we enshrine a view of marriage as an emotional union, about adults mainly, we're going to make it harder over time for people to practice sexual exclusivity when it has an emotional cost. We're going to make it harder for them to live out permanent exclusivity, a permanent commitment of any kind, when the emotional union itself fades. And by teaching with our law, and therefore through culture and through practice, the idea that moms and dads are perfectly interchangeable, that men and women don't bring different gifts to the parenting enterprise, we're going to lower people's incentives to stick with a marriage for the sake of the kids. After all, what really makes the marriage is the emotional union, and it's inauthentic to stick with that once the emotions have faded. And it's not like the father or the mother is contributing anything special to parenting, because they're replaceable. So enshrining this view is not just going to change who can get the tax break, who can file for joint tax relief. It's going to change what people think of as what they're entering when they form a marriage, and it may even change the rates at which they form a marriage to begin with. The more we see marriage as just a form of simple social approval, without any more specific content, the harder it will be to see why people should form a marriage in the first place. There are also effects, for much more direct effects perhaps, for the people who hold a certain vision of marriage, who hold the traditional view in particular, because the proposal to redefine marriage would equate their view with bigotry. And even though in the United States, at least, we don't jail people for their personal views because of the First Amendment, we do use every form of penalty short of that, short of the criminal law, to discourage their views. I mean, think about how we treat racists. People can lose their jobs for expressing racist views. Institutions that express or act on racist views can be denied all kinds of benefits, tax-exempt status, civil contracts, and so on. Every form of penalty of that kind would be applied to any institution or individual who held the traditional view of marriage if the law came to teach that that view was bigotry. But that's exactly what the law would teach if it redefined marriage. And so one of the main arguments that gets used for redefinition actually cuts the other way. And that argument is freedom. Usually people say, you know, people should be free to live how they please. But they are. Same-sex couples are free to form, to have a sexual relationship, to live together, to have their religious tradition recognize their relationship as a marriage, to have their employer recognize it as a marriage. Bigamy is banned. In most of the states in the United States, you can go to jail for trying to form a second marriage, but same-sex relationships are not banned, and nobody is proposing that they be banned. This debate is about whether to positively recognize them as marriages with the kinds of consequences and collateral effects that we've been talking about, or not. But if we do recognize them, it's not that any same-sex couple is going to be more free than they were before, but it is true that some people, namely those who hold the traditional view, will be less free than they were before, at least in practice, at least in terms of the incentives and disincentives that society gives them. They will have every disincentive to their own view and to expressing it and to acting on it. And their freedom to bring their children up in accordance with that view will be limited because, after all, the non-discrimination laws will kick in and the educational curricula will enshrine this new view and will make it all that much harder for people to teach and pass on their own moral and religious convictions. So these are just some of the ways, in terms of parenting, in terms of the outcomes for children, since we know that stable married biological parenting is the best environment for children and produces the consistently best outcomes, and for religious liberty. Some of the many interests that get affected by what vision of marriage we enshrine in our law.